Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, a few house rules. Please ensure all your devices are kept on silent. And all sessions today are being recorded and live streamed and will be available after the session. If you haven't already, you can scan one of the QR codes on screen to get the AWS Summit app, which gives you access to all of the agenda as well as providing feedback for the sessions. For the session is on how Judo Bank modernizes SME banking with Thought Machine. It's my pleasure to welcome on stage Lawrence from Judo Bank and Kinnera and Katrina from AWS.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Just a quick show of hands, who's travelled for Summit this week? Likewise. As I was getting ready, I was explaining to my kids why I needed to be away, that I was doing a presentation, and they're like, "Mum, what's a presentation?" My daughter quickly piped up and she said, "You mean show and tell?" So I just want to thank you all for joining our show and tell today on core banking modernisation with Judo. For those I haven't met, my name's Kat Fox, account manager here at AWS in the banking and lending portfolio, and I want to thank you again for coming. In terms of agenda, you've got about 25 minutes with us today. We'll be looking at why migration and modernisation is important. We'll then be hearing from Lawrence in terms of the Judo Bank transformation. I'm sure why you're all here. And finally, he'll share with us some what next. So what is core banking? I'm sure all of us have interacted with a core banking system. A back-end system that processes daily banking, transactions and post updates. It generally includes deposits, loans and credit information, and goes back to a general ledger or a reporting tool. So now we know what it is, why is it important to think about modernisation? We know that banks are facing increasing pressures, and we think about that from three lenses. From the customer's point of view, they want to be treated holistically, and they want you to know everything there is to know about them. From a market perspective, we know that fintechs have a lower cost to serve, and banks are rethinking their economic model. And finally, from the regulators, we know that the regulators are putting more pressure on banks to give back to the customer ownership of their data. And with that, I'll hand over to Kinnera.
Thanks, Kat. Hello all, I'm Kinnera Vajjala, a Senior Solutions Architect here at AWS. And let's get into the actual technical things, right? With this core banking, there are various ways to modernize it. The first one is SaaS versus self-hosted. Imagine you are a simple, nimble startup and you want to quickly go to the market. That's when you look at the SaaS deployment model. This is basically where the vendors actually maintain the platform for you, and then you access that platform in a secure way using your AWS private link. Pros and cons of this, it helps you, the vendors will take care of the operational efficiency, etc. While there are some large banks who would prefer to go with the self-hosted model, in which case they have better control over the infrastructure. The second way of looking at this modernization is cloud native versus traditional deployments. How many of you have been maintaining legacy monolithic applications and understand the pain of it, right? We know all this. It's such a pain to make a small change and push it to production. While with the cloud native deployments, wherein I would call microservices as a small reusable pattern, where you can design and develop small microservices, and even using event-driven architectures, you will be able to scale based on the demand, and you will be able to scale independent of each other. That's the thing about the monolithic versus the microservices architecture. And using event-driven architectures, you are actually scaling based on demand, and using serverless, you are only paying for what you use. And with the serverless architectures, specifically with cloud native stuff, you will have more control over the data, which means that you have access to the real-time data, which helps in personalization, as Kat mentioned before. The third way of looking at it is build versus buy. What's your flexibility? Do you have the time to build it from scratch? That's exactly what Judo did. Lawrence had hired a strong team to get this done. Or you can actually look at the vendor solutions. Again, two ways to look at the vendor solutions. There are some products where it will help you create products from scratch, while other vendor solutions just give you a bit of configuration changes. So these are the three different things that you need to look at when you're actually looking at modernization. The next step is, how do you actually modernize? What are the various approaches that you as customers are taking today to migrate or modernize your legacy core banking system? The first one is augmenting your core. Imagine you want to retain your legacy system, but you want to go quickly to the market. That's when you look at augmenting it with the modern cloud interfaces, in which case you are using the new interfaces to create the new products. And this is the pattern generally large banks take to start with, because this is quicker and easier to start with. And the second one is migrating your core. This is generally when you as a customer decide to do your data center exits. How many of you are doing the data center exits now? A lot? So with this, what you do is actually you want to migrate your legacy system from on-prem to cloud. And then two ways to do it, right? One is where you do a lift and shift, which means that you are picking up your monolithic application and putting onto the cloud. Or the second way is we are actually splitting it into microservices. I wouldn't call them microservices, I would call them as macro services, and then put it onto cloud. You're doing two different things here, right? One is you're actually migrating your application, and the other thing is you're actually migrating your data on cloud. That's the second one. And the third one is, imagine you want to just reimagine your core banking system, redesign it using cloud-native serverless architectures or event-driven architectures. And that's exactly what Judo Bank did, and Lawrence will explain you shortly. The benefits of it we just discussed. It provides you real-time data, cost optimization, scaling up and down based on the demand. And the third one is, the final one is the greenfield deployment, which is where, imagine you want to try a new product, but you don't have time. And this is more a strategic decision, right? Where you want to start a new line of business and or start a new product altogether. And today's conversation is more on technical stuff, so we'll not be looking at that. That's about the technical thing. Now I'll give it over to Lawrence to explain the actual story. Yep.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Lawrence. I'm the head of engineering and architecture at Judo. I've been at Judo for probably nearing 2.5 years now. And I remember the first day I joined Judo, my former boss said, "You originally thought you were coming in to do some digital apps for bankers, but no, we're going to do a core banking migration," which was, a bit of a surprise. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about the last 2 years and specifically how we kind of approached migration, how we approached a lot of the things around our architecture, but also some lessons learned, because core banking migration is a meaty topic. We're obviously a smaller bank, so we've obviously heard a lot of the stories where larger organizations struggle over many, many years. So this is somewhat of a good news story to kind of share with you around how we approached it. For those of you who don't know who Judo are, so we are a bank who focus on small to medium-sized businesses. So we lend predominantly, so we have around 8,000 lending customers with about a $12 billion loan book. So it's a mixture of lending, and then we also have deposits. And I think that our value proposition in market is relationship banking. So we are not all about digital banking. We actually have a large number of bankers. We think our customers value the relationships they have with bankers. And so that's kind of our niche product in market. So we don't have a super flashy digital app. We don't overinvest in self-service for everything. And that's really resonated in market for us. Judo was started about 8 years ago. We didn't overinvest in technology when we started. We bought very cheap systems. Let's prove the value proposition before overinvesting in expensive technology. So we have had many, evolutions of our technology, and it came to the point, I think around probably 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when we needed to update our core banking platform. So if you look a little bit back to 2023, we had monolithic core banking platform. It was outsourced. We would raise a ticket. It might take weeks to months to actually fix things or get features deployed. And now we're in a much better place. We've leveraged Thought Machine as our core banking platform. And over the course of 1 to 2 years, we have now got a very flexible core banking platform. We can actually deploy features and new products very rapidly, and we'll talk a little bit about that throughout today. Again, when I joined, there were no engineers at Judo. Everything was outsourced. So again, everything was done through statements of work. Then the changes were just kept happening, would actually take a very long time to achieve. And there was kind of minimal, code standards within the organization. So we had a variety of different things deployed in very different ways across our ecosystem. I'll talk a little bit in a minute about internalizing our engineering team. We still have a very lean team, but we've managed to uplift engineering standards, put in a lot of processes and tooling in place so that we can actually roll out changes and fixes very quickly. And then thirdly, it's more of a cultural organizational shift from project-based delivery. So everything is a project, it finishes, then gets thrown over the fence to someone else, to a bit more of persistency in the way we deliver. So actually having teams own and also run our software and services. This is still an ongoing shift for us. It's been a really challenge, I guess, cultural shift from that project-based mindset. So that's something we're still working on, but it's definitely a lot better than it was probably a year or two ago. So everyone thinks you need a large team to do a core banking migration and run a bunch of services. We actually have a very lean team, and most of which are here today. So we actually just hired 3 cloud engineers and 6 software engineers, and we may hire another couple. That is our engineering team in-house at Judo. We obviously have some partners support us, but it's not a massive amount. So again, I've talked to some organizations who have 80, 100 people, but we have a very lean team, and so our principle is very much a small number of very good engineers outstrip a large number of not so great engineers. So the cloud engineering team very much taking ownership of infrastructure patterns. We use Terraform heavily for scale, security, and we do a lot of stuff on cost optimization. So they've been pivotal in our journey to kind of make sure we have a very sustainable cloud ecosystem, which is also adheres to APA regulations and all of the various regulations that we have to adhere to as a bank. And we have 6 Python software engineers. So all of our stack is written in Python, which is, some of you may question, but it's actually worked really well for us. And they've been the ones to really govern code quality, kind of architecture in terms of the engineering side of it, and kind of really look to integrate a bunch of new tooling that we brought on board, whether that's observability, monitoring. We leverage New Relic. And we probably wouldn't have been able to deliver without the team we have today, who most of here, so thanks team for doing a great job. And we also have a solution architecture team, so we have about 4 or 5 people in the team who kind of govern the way we think about architectural patterns and have a lot of domain knowledge that lives with them. So this was kind of the core hub of the team that kind of led us through the last 2 years. Talking about architecture, so all of our core banking stack is written purely in AWS Lambdas. So everything is serverless, and this gives us a huge benefits in terms of operational overhead. So we don't have to worry about patching containers, we don't have to worry about auto-scaling of Fargate clusters, etc. It just works for us. We've had to introduce quite a number of engineering patterns to work around some of the nuances of Lambdas for sure, but that's kind of where we are today. And so cost-wise, all of the Lambdas we have across our 18 services we build around Thought Machine, I looked at our bill this morning, and it's probably around $2,500 a month. So that's all of our compute across all of our banking services that we have today, which is a fraction of our AWS bill. Thought Machine itself is a very event-driven system, so it works super well with us when we combine that with Lambdas. So for our very spiky workloads, which happen overnight when we're generating end-of-day events, which for those of you who work in banking, that's a big kind of overnight job which happens. We will receive 80,000, 100,000 events come down through Kafka. The Lambdas will scale up appropriately, process all our end-of-day events, and then spit them out to our data platform. So the architecture has worked really well for us. We have no desire to move to containers. We have a pretty solid architecture around Lambdas that are working really well. And it's enabled us to scale and not have a large team to support a ton of extra infrastructure. So that's a really important part of the architecture for us. Another part of this is resiliency. So you can receive messages from Thought Machine more than once. You have to deal with a lot of these engineering patterns around idempotency, around retrying events. And so the resiliency for us has been really an important journey. And so having, again, a very experienced team to manage that for us has been really important. And actually demonstrating monitoring and alerting throughout the chain. So when something does go wrong, and look, things do go wrong, as long as we're able to triage it and then be able to immediately identify where the issue is and then come up with a solution. And so we've leveraged New Relic quite heavily with open telemetry to instrument all of our services. Then thirdly, secure by design. So we had to very early on create a brand new AWS landing zone infrastructure. So we originally worked with AWS on this initially, and it's had a few steps and evolutions over time. But we have very segregated AWS accounts. So that's per domain, so whether that's payments, whether that's lending, whether that's deposits, and then per environment. So this kind of limits our blast radius. This is important for us regulatory-wise as well. And very tight integration with Entra for single sign-on. So very fine-grained controls throughout. So different roles in the organization will have different access to different things within our AWS landscape. And then from a security operation control perspective, if someone logs in with a power user access to a particular account, our SOC team will get notified and someone will ask, why is this actually a permitted action from someone and what are they trying to do? So we've kind of integrated all of this from a secure by design perspective. And we've also really driven private networking. So we have a number of SaaS platforms, whether that's Salesforce, whether that's Thought Machine, whether that's Confluent Kafka. All of those are networked by a private link with AWS. So we have private connections throughout our entire ecosystem. There'll be portions of that that are not like that, but we have roadmaps to kind of bring most of that into private networking. And that really just helps from a security perspective internally at Judo. So this is a very simplified architecture diagram, and my team who are here will probably roll their eyes at this because it is very simplified. But essentially we have our kind of SaaS platforms at the bottom here, whether that's Thought Machine, Confluent Kafka, Salesforce, in their own AWS tenancies which they manage for us. Thought Machine will generate events for us, whether that's an interest adjustment, whether that's an adjustment to a customer's account, whether that's an end of day event. That will get federated onto our own Confluent Kafka cluster. And then our Lambdas will consume those over time to actually either save a transaction in a database in Aurora, whether that's to apply a piece of business logic and then send it downstream to our data platform, or interact between Lambdas across our different accounts. So this architecture has worked pretty well. We have a very consistent approach to it. So we have a consistent DevOps deployment patterns to Lambdas, to how we manage databases, to how we operationalize things. So that's probably one of the things that we face into is really the operationalization of this. Things do go wrong. How do we replay things? How do we actually solve issues within this architecture that we have? And so it's taken a lot of evolution over the past year or two. So it's kind of like a little bit around the team, the architecture. Wanted to take a bit of time actually spending on our timeline for migration. And so for a lot of you who are thinking about a migration, this is a lengthy period of time. I mean, this is actually reasonably short for most people who tackle this, but I think it was Q1 2023, so January 2023, we went through a procurement process for a core banking platform. We ended up rolling with Thought Machine, which has been great for us. It's a very thin core banking platform. It's not a monolithic one at all, so we had to build a bunch of services around it, as I kind of alluded to before, whether that's payments, whether that's statements, commissions. Our previous core banking platform did most of that for us. So that's kind of when we realized we actually need to build an engineering team and leverage some partners to really support building out this architecture around Thought Machine. So I joined after that decision, and again, I said earlier, welcome, here's a core banking migration, let's go do it. So I had to spend quite a bit of time hiring the team. We had a bunch of partners work with us as well across the build portion of this. So it's probably like June, July 2023 that we start building stuff. And so we got going reasonably quickly. So we had all the cloud infrastructure built out. We then started building out patterns for Lambdas and pipelines, which didn't really exist at Judo before. And so that build and test phase probably took around 6 to 9 months before we got our first new-to-bank pilot customer onto Thought Machine, which was a pretty safe customer, it wasn't a complex loan or anything else. And we started with lending. So I reckon it was already around February, March 2024, we got our first pilot customer on Thought Machine. We then started migrating a select number of customers onto Thought Machine. And then we started just building out the rest of the use cases and features which we hadn't quite built out yet. And so it got to about, I think it was around August 2024, where we were then in the process of doing dress rehearsals for migration. So this was probably run over 3 or 4 weekends, where we would do dress rehearsals as if we were actually doing the migration into our pre-prod environment. So again, we had a run book. It was going to take 2 days to fully migrate. And so we would keep doing that, rehearsing, iterating on different parts of the run book. What would happen if something happened at a particular time? Would we roll back? Would we fix forward? And so we actually we finalized the lending migration, I think August 2024. And so that was all of our lending books, so 8,000 customers of varying degrees of complexity of loans. Like business lending is probably, for us, one of the more complex types of products we have. That's business loans, home loans, line of credit. And for us, through that journey, there would have been a bunch of lending accounts historically, which were set up very early on in our journey, which resembled, we didn't really know how they worked anymore. So we had to kind of reverse engineer a lot through that journey as well of how we actually could migrate these into a new core banking platform. And I'll come on to a bit of the learnings around this because there is quite a lot. And then we proceeded straight into deposits. So deposits, we had about, I think, 80,000 deposits accounts to migrate. Similar approach. Again, we had all the foundations in place now, so it was very much around the build, test, pilot, migration phase. So it was a well-repeated process by that point. So we were able to roll it out with a new product reasonably quickly. Again, there are nuances to deposits. We had to build out a new service. We had to build out a new smart contract in Thought Machine. And there was just some challenges, a slightly different volume. It's a bigger channel for us from digital banking. So it provided a few more challenges around performance, etc., which we had to solve around. So again, that's kicked off, I think, July 2024. I think pilot customer around February of this year, I think. And then we achieved the full migration of our deposits book on, I think it was April this year, so a couple of months ago. So at that point, all of our accounts have rolled off our old core banking platform, everything onto Thought Machine. And then it's the stuff that everyone forgets, which actually there is quite a bit of mess left over from that. So we have to carve out a bit of time for the team to actually clean up, right? And I think that's the thing which everyone wants to not think about from the business, that we have to spend a bit of time cleaning up engineering and architecture from the old world. So whether that's decommissioning infrastructure, whether that's removing pieces of code which was calling both systems, which happened in our payment service. And so we're just finalizing that at the moment, and then we'll have a pretty clean ecosystem from that perspective. And so yes, that would be kind of looking at from the start of build for the lending to where we are now, just over 2 years for the entire product set. But the lending stuff itself took just over a year, which has been great. So lessons learned, I think, beware of analysis paralysis. So we see this a lot, and I've worked in consulting before, and I've seen it a lot as well. So don't try and overthink everything. Get moving, get building, learn and iterate. Like we got going quite early. We introduced some technical debt early. We had to refactor things, but we had learnings along the way, which if we just tried to wait, we probably wouldn't have got anywhere near where we are today. The second one, again, this is a non-technical one, but plan for significant subject matter expertise internally. You really need to have people 100% dedicated who know your existing core banking platform, how interest rates are calculated, how the whole thing works. Trying to reverse engineer that is nigh on impossible at times. So bringing on expertise internally and externally and making sure they're 100% dedicated focus to this initiative was super critical for us. So that was everyone from our FinOps team through to our product team, through to our operations team who are running our existing core banking platform. So do not underestimate the focus needed to get this done. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. Thought Machine requires experience. So again, we brought on some external partners. We had Thought Machine support who've done this before elsewhere. So that was a critical part for us. Don't underestimate that. There is a lot of nuances to Thought Machine. I alluded to it before, resilient event-driven architecture. Do not take that for granted. Like how you deal with event-driven architectures is not straightforward for everyone. We learned a lot through that process around how we deal with the architecture we built. And then tooling is super important as well. So things fail, get used to it. How do you remediate it? How do you create operational process for it? How do you introduce tooling to actually support you through that? We underestimated this probably a little bit to start with, but now we're in a really good place where we have a very good process around remediation. So results achieved. So we're now at a place where we've had, well, I would say zero downtime due to infrastructure. So due to our Lambda architecture, like nothing really fails per se from an infrastructure perspective. Sure, things may time out every now and again with our downstream SaaS providers, and that's kind of where some of the resilience comes in. But that's really supported us, so we have a very lean operations team as well. From a product development perspective, historically launching a new product would have taken a year plus. We're now in a place where we're pretty confident we can launch new products in market in around 4 months. And we're starting building a new product, savings product, in a couple of weeks' time, and we're kind of envisaging it taking around 4 months to release to market. Again, resolution duration, We've gone from a place where we'd raise a ticket with a vendor, it takes 2+ weeks to get a response sometimes, to now we have a team internally and with partners where we can resolve most things within a single day or a couple of days, depending on the urgency of the incident we have. And then the frustration of our last core banking platform was really around response speeds for APIs. So our digital banking was a little sluggish at times. It's probably around 4x faster now that we're leveraging Thought Machine and the architecture we built around it. So I'll just come back a little bit to what I said before. Focus. Like, I've talked to a number of banks who have attempted this, and it seems to be a lack of focus. And so if there's one thing you can take away from this, having all of company focus on delivering this is super important. Nothing else got much done at Judo in those 2 years, right? But we managed to do this. And it's probably as a result of that just single focus on core banking migration. So I'll wrap up with my piece here before handing to Kinnera, but what's next for Judo? So again, we're building out new products. We're building out new savings products currently. We're also just incrementally enhancing our lending products to customers. And again, we can do this reasonably rapidly now, as before it would take months, etc. to do. And then it wouldn't be an AWS conference without me talking a little bit about AI. So we're looking at some things in the AI ops space. So we've been speaking a little bit with ThoughtWorks, who's one of our partners in AWS, around how do we leverage Gen AI in the very early stage triage of issues that we have, and how can that simplify a lot of the triage work? So that's something we're probably going to look at as we go into this year, and there's other use cases around credit memos and other things that we're looking at. So that's kind of me. I'll pass to Kinnera for now.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. That's amazing outcomes and a great customer story. Let me go back. Just to quickly give a bit of summary, right? As you understand, few things there. One is the resiliency and the plan to do this core banking modernization, which took 2 years for Judo Bank, and kudos to Lawrence and his team who did this amazing work. And touching back on the outcomes that the team has achieved, and if I have to map it to the AWS set of principles, the fact that they were able to reduce the new product development time from 1 year plus to just 4 months, that's where the agility and flexibility comes into picture, where AWS takes care of that heavy lifting for the infrastructure and the DevOps automation, and that developers will actually look at the actual application development. In terms of elasticity, the way I see it is the fact that they have used a serverless and event-driven architecture, the infrastructure will scale up and down based on the demand. And they are going to pay only for what they use. And that's where the cost efficiency comes into picture. Generally, most of the banks spend a lot of money on this CapEx, where they over-provision their infrastructure and they don't really use it later. But with this serverless architecture, you are paying only for what you use, and it just scales down when you don't need it. And our AWS cloud infrastructure is built to be, it's probably the most flexible and secure cloud infrastructure available today. Our infrastructure, it supports all the compliance requirements given virtually any regulatory across the globe. So the fact that you are on this with the proper design, you are secure. That's about a bit of summary, and I'll give it over to Kat. Yeah.
That's it for today. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Lawrence is hanging around for about half an hour for anyone who has any questions. He's very open to taking them. Appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of Summit. Thank you.
Thanks.